everybody, and welcome once again to the Open Mic, Writers in Their Own Words, the show where every episode I talk to writers about their work, about writing, about the publishing industry, how they do what they do, in hopes that if you're an aspiring writer out there, you'll learn a little something. I know I learn a little something every time, which is part of the reason I do this. I'm really excited today about today's guest because we met at BoucherCon recently, which is, the big mystery writers convention, which was in San Diego this year. And it was really a great event for me because, of course, I got to meet a lot of writers, some of whom I was, of their work I was familiar with and others not so much. JD is one of the folks whose work I had not discovered yet, but here he is now. I have been reading his debut novel, which is called Zig Zag. We're going to talk all about that. So let me get right to it. My guest today is the author J.D. O'Brien, whose novel I just noted, Zig Zag, has been called everything from a cosmic American crime odyssey to Offbeat to Elmore Leonard meets Warren Zevon, which that really appeals to me because I'm a huge Warren Zevon fan. I'm deep into the book now, and all I can say is all of those descriptions, to me, are all spot on and all in the best possible way. So, hey, Joe, I'm really happy to have you on the show today. Welcome to the Open Mic.
Oh, thanks for having me, Rich.
Absolutely. And I got to give a little shout out to you, too, because, when we met, I was trying to buy the book so you could sign it, and then the bookstore had sold out, which is that's every author's dream. They sell out your book. But he was kind enough to get me one of his books at a good price and still sign it for me. So I appreciated that very much. Some we
Oh,
lowly
nice.
podcasters. Well, so I read some of the things people are saying about it. I was talking about some of the great descriptions. Why don't you tell us a little bit about Zig Zag?
Well, yeah, Zig Zag is a crime novel. It sort of kicks off with a robbery or a heist of a marijuana dispensary in Van Nuys up in the San Fernando Valley in California. And that sort of sets things into motion for this. The main character's name's Harry Robitor, and he's sort of this, kind of a burnout. He fancies himself kind of a cosmic cowboy, throwback, but he's a bail bondsman in Van Nuys. And, once the heist happens, he ends up having to go, he bails out the thief and then they skip bail. And so he has to kind of chase them down in throughout the Mojave Desert. And it's sort of it kind of becomes more of a kind of an episodic road story where it kind of, we call it kind of a lukewarm pursuit. He sort of is in, he goes from Joshua Tree up to the Barstow area. And so it kind of moves around as he pursues the culprits, who knocked over the pot dispensary.
Well, you just mentioned something I was actually going to bring it up later, but I'll do it now, which is, to me, the book is equal parts road novel, crime fiction, thriller. It's got elements of all those things. And that's great for readers because it's certainly me. I love an eclectic story way of telling stories, but it's not always so good for the industry because they love nothing more than to put writers into a very convenient little box that helps them market this product, which is how they see it as product. How was that process for you of getting this book from concept to publication?
Well, I think that's one of the advantages I've had of working with a indie publisher, as opposed to trying to, I didn't go through a lot of the hoops that a lot of people do with we're dealing with a big marketing department and publicists and people who are really just trying to, like you said, package it up and sell it. And so I really lucked out with, I did kind of a lot of research when I was sending the book around, really not just kind of sending it out to everybody. I was really trying to find somebody who, who I thought it might resonate with and who may, like it the way it is in a way without having to, like you said, shape it into something that it isn't. And so I connected with an editor at Schaffner Press and just sort of immediately hit it off, and it was sort of up his alley. And yeah, so I think that was it. I've been lucky in that sense that I haven't had to deal with a lot of that, that pigeonholing, or that really trying to squeeze it into a more, nutshell kind of down the middle, like whether it's just a straight ahead thriller or a hard boiled noir or anything. I think it's part of the reason they liked it, I think, was because of what you said, that it's kind of its own thing.
You know,
But I think in selling it, it is a little tough, when you're having to kind of, I mean, I think it's doing okay, but I think it does have to, it's not a one line description, in
right.
general.
Well, and I've talked with a lot of authors of late who have a more eclectic story style, and which again, I love it. I don't like things that are easily pigeonholed, and it's interesting to me how we're starting to see a few more of them. I mean, nothing will, look, Lincoln Child and Stephen King, they're gonna they could do anything they want to. And most time when you're a debut author, they really do want to put you into something. If they're going to publish it at all, it's got to be in something that, was a very strict genre rule. So that must have been really gratifying to have that kind of connection where you did not feel that someone else was going to have that much influence over the story you're trying to tell.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely edited pretty. We went through a pretty, heavy editing process, and then there was a lot of, there has been a lot of those conversations of how we can sell it, and how to spin it that way. But it really wasn't like, we need to radically change this whole thing, or we need to, But because I have heard, especially, at Bouchercon too, you talk to people, and you do hear some horror stories where sometimes the book, even if the book hasn't changed, the way the cover, the marketing, or whatever it is, doesn't really have anything to do with what the author envisioned, or how they feel about the book.
Did you have input on the cover?
You froze up there for a second.
Oh,
yeah, that was another thing. I was really lucky because I have a friend who's a designer, and they didn't, they gave us, I think we presented three of them, and they had people that they normally work with, and then but they did give me the benefit of the doubt, at least at first, to let us take a shot at it. And, went through a few rounds, but, we went out there too, pretty much we got the cover pretty much exactly what we wanted.
I'm going to hold it up again because to me it's a really cool cover because you've got obviously you got the pot plants and a Joshua tree style thing, since a lot of this does take place in the Mojave. Just the whole thing is really cool. Now, as someone who smoked a lot of weed in my youth, I knew, of course, exactly what Zig Zag is. But it made me think too, the weed world has changed a lot since those days. Back when I used to smoke a lot of dope, which I don't in many, many years. A lot of the attention, though, I've noticed now when we talk about stories, or whether it's TV or print, is on dispensaries. How did you determine that would be where you would start this book? Was there something like you read of a robbery or something, or was there an inspiration there that came out of that?
Yeah, well, when I used to live, I mean, I guess that maybe throws it back a few years, because I think a lot of these places have been kind of pushed out by more legitimate dispensaries. But the dispensary in the book is very close to when I lived in Van Nuys, where a lot of the book is set. There were a lot of these places around, these sort of, borderline illegal kind of, just storefronts where you'd walk in and there'd be really kind of before it was seriously regulated. And I think there are some places like that you still see pop up, but that was one of the, when I lived in Van Nuys, it was a lot of the story generated there with, there were bail. If you've ever been there, you walk around, there's bail bonds concerns, there's, pawn shops, there's, used car lots. It's kind of a, rundown, kind of a low life place, which is kind of perfect for a crime novel. And I think just the combination of the protagonist, Harry's a big pot smoker, and I think it just was sort of natural in the sense that the place that he goes to would get robbed, and it would be kind of. But I always was sort of fascinated by this sort of borderline illegal aspect of those places. Whereas now you go in and it's like the place I go to is like a Starbucks. It's just
Right.
really upscale, and something like that. Like what happens in the book here could probably never happen at these really tight as a drum places that are out there now. But those places that existed in LA and probably still exist in various places were very much ripe for this sort of this sort of knockover.
Yeah, so I'm a reporter by trade, and so I've covered the slow progression of marijuana legalization over the last 15, 20 years because it started with ballot measure here in California and then individual states, et cetera, et cetera. And so now it's more than I can't remember the exact number of states and the population that it covers, but it's a majority of the country now where it's legal. And it's just so interesting to me how that whole industry is kind of emerging out from the shadows. And I'm not naive. There's still a huge black market industry. I get all that, but that's why I say the dispensary thing. Now I've started to see it more as a focal point in some TV series and that kind of a thing. And I find that so fascinating because all that stuff's happened in my lifetime.
Yeah. Oh, it's amazing. Yeah.
Well, and I used to live in West Hollywood many years ago when I first went down to LA to go to school, and it, it all really resonates with me when you talk about some of those places. You go to the Valley or whatever and everything, and it just hasn't changed, right? None of that stuff has changed in 35 years.
Yeah, yeah, and I think there's a Western element to the book. It's a crime novel, but there's a lot of like Western. It has a Western feel to it too, and there is something
Yes.
about that too. They actually refer, like in the old days of those things, that was kind of the Wild West of legal pot. When it was those places were just sort of unregulated, and before it all kind of got buttoned up. And then, but yeah, you're right. Like now, I live in Massachusetts, and I work in advertising as my day job, and all the billboards, we used to be able to kind of block up billboards for our clients. They're all cannabis now. You can't get near none of our clients can get billboards because they're all taken up by the new cannabis dispensaries. So if you drive down any of the highways here, it's all just wall to wall dispensary billboards.
Absolutely. I just spent a
Yeah.
week in Vegas and I was stunned at how many pot dispensaries.
Yeah.
All the billboards were either lawyers or pot
Yeah.
dispensaries.
Yeah.
They
Right.
literally make up 95% of the billboard space. So you would think it'd be casino shows or what have
Yeah.
you. And there's a few of those too, but not on the billboards. The billboards are all dispensaries and lawyers. And
Yeah.
I,
You'd think they'd be saturated by now, but it seems there's still a lot of money flowing. I'm amazed they report, because it's still only a few years old here, and they report like what these dispensaries are making and it's just it's incredible.
yeah, it's a really ripe industry for talking about, and that's what I guess again, I've written a lot about the challenges that dispensaries have in getting banking services, and you get really down into the weeds on so to speak on how the government regulates it and regulates the bankers, and I've talked to a lot of small mom and pop outlets that talk about how their struggle has been, because you could in theory, the guy who comes and puts the safe in your dispensary could end up being charged via if they want to use a RICO statute on you. So it's just a really crazy
Yeah.
regulatory mishmash there. So yeah, perfect setting for this kind of story. Um, some of your reviews have likened your work to Elmore Leonard, which I absolutely see. You have that same there's a lot of the feel there, but also folks like Hunter S. Thompson and Thomas Pynchon and Barry Gifford. And I mean, that's really heady stuff to me. So, first question and all that is do you read reviews? And second, how do you react to them? When you read somebody comparing your work to somebody like Thomas Pynchon, does that motivate you or does it terrify you or something in between?
Well, that one I don't take. I mean, I think that one people are probably just talking about Inherent Vice, which is kind of has a similar vibe with he's got this that his stoner. I don't think I'm being compared to Gravity's Rainbow or or any of the big genius book. Yeah, I mean, not that Inherent Vice I love, but now I'd love to be one of the. Hopefully, maybe one day be one of those people that doesn't read the reviews, But I think being a debut, it's really the first time that the book is out and I have a book out in the world where strangers are commenting on it or so yeah. I mean, I definitely see I don't obsessively read them, but I definitely will go through Goodreads once in a while, or I'll if something pops up on a blog or a magazine or something, I'll read it. But I think that's one of those things you just have to. People always say that if you believe the good reviews, you have to believe the bad reviews too. So I don't. I've been lucky to kind of find a spot where I can be, where a good review can kind of put some wind in my sails and make me feel good for a little while, or kind of be encouraging. But the bad ones don't sideline me too much, because it's one of those things where even you could pick your 5 favorite books of all time and go on Goodreads, and there's guaranteed to be a bunch of, 2-star reviews, people who think it's the worst, so I think that's especially Goodreads, it's so subjective. But and like I said, being a debut writer, or in your first book, you're just kind of grateful that anybody's even talking about it, or that it's out there at all. Right. So I think I have a pretty good, my not that they needed to, because I probably wouldn't have anyway, but I did get one warning. I think they had an issue with somebody in the past, but my publisher did tell me not to get in the weeds. Like, don't start, arguing on Goodreads. If some people do, if you get a really negative review, it's tempting to go on and comment on it or send the reviewer a message. But I haven't done any of that, and I think I can't imagine any good could come of that.
I'm glad to hear that, because honestly, it's one of the things I talk to people I know, who seem to spend a lot of time arguing with people in general on social media. And I always say, why are you wasting your breath on this stuff? And you're so right. Go look at any Yelp review. I don't care what it is, restaurant, car repair place, whatever, it doesn't matter. There will be, 5 stars. And then there's always 1 or 2 people who just, hate it beyond words, and they find something wrong with everything. It feels to me like that's the biggest waste of your time, is to try to engage with any of these people, because they're not happy unless they're unhappy. So let them be unhappy. Happy.
Yeah. And with a book, especially, it's so subjective. Sometimes it's just not, you can, you read one, you can just tell that it's just not this person's kind of book, And in my case, I don't do I'm one of those people on Goodreads. If I go on, people I know or people I like, I'll go on to give a 5-star review, or say something that just to bump the ratings, which I think a lot of writers do for each other. But that's another thing to take into account too. Sometimes with blurbs and with, Goodreads, you never know how much of it is, how connected somebody is, or whether they took a class with this person or whatever it is.
Right.
So you always have to kind of take whatever, good or bad, with kind of a grain of salt.
Well, it brings up, I didn't have this on my list of questions, but I'm curious, as a reader, do you finish a book regardless of how much you're enjoying it? Or are you someone who could say, this isn't working for me, and you just put it down?
I used to be more hard on myself about plowing through and finishing. But I'm sure yours is even worse just with doing this show, but my to read pile is massive. I've got a ton, so I'll generally put a book down if I'm not into it. Because a lot of times too, it might not even be that the book is bad. It just might not be what I'm not in the mood for at the moment. Because I've had plenty of books where I've gone back to it later and loved it. But if I really hate a book, I won't give it much more. I'll set it aside. And if it's something that I feel like, or if something that it's been recommended to me by somebody, like, oh, you're really going to love this, I'll give it a little more, give it 50 pages or 60 pages. But a lot of times I'll pick up a book and abandon it after 10 pages or 15 pages or so. But I used to never do that. But now I figure now I'm getting older. I have too many books to read. I may as well my problem mainly is rereading. I go back. My girlfriend was giving me shit about that the other day, where I have these piles of books everywhere that I haven't read, and then I'm rereading this book that I've read 4 times already. So I do that. That slows down my getting through my to read pile too. Is I'm a big rereader, which I think a lot of writers are. You find your favorites and you kind of learn. You try to figure out. You just go deeper and deeper with it every time.
Well, and it's the beauty of a well-told story. You can get something different out of it every time.
Right.
And I think that's what we all strive to have in our world is, we write stories that resonate on more than a surface level, right? I think that's a great thing, actually. I've got several books that I've read many times as well. And I think that's great. I wanted to talk to you about humor, because you have what I consider a gift for realistic humor. which I think is great because it's really hard for humor to come across well in writing, talking about things that are subjective. I have picked up and subsequently put down, I don't even know how many books over the years that were supposed to be really funny. This is great, often by a particular comedian, or, oh, all the blurbs are, this is hilarious, laugh out loud funny. And then, I'm putting them right back down again because they're not funny to me at all. And so um, I don't really buy that's what the last thing that'll attract me when I read about a book is, oh, it's got humor, right? It's like, okay, if it does, it does. I also spent a lot of years in the blue collar world before I transitioned into journalism many decades ago. And I really like the use of humor in Zig Zag because it absolutely reminds me of those days and how we all really talk to each other. Dark sense of humor, almost a little cynical and sarcastic. I mean, that's just so part of the blue collar world, at least from my experience. Tell me a little bit about your philosophy on using humor in your writing. Is it natural, or did you have to work at it? What's the genesis of that for you?
I don't know. I'm always drawn to I've had the same disappointments you have too, where because I'm always looking for funny books, and I've had that, where I've been like, you get it, but it's like it's so subjective to what you find, and sometimes just something really hits a sweet spot for me, and it just makes me laugh out loud through it, and it's great. But for me, like, I think it's just the way it comes out. It's just a filter. Some writers are good at, like, I'm not one of those writers who could like write about the names of all the trees and the birds and the shrub. Some people can do that and it's not effortless, but it's just what they see. It's what their natural. I think there's just a filter that has that. um and if anything, I try to dial it back a little bit sometimes, because if things get too, you don't want it to tip into being zany or goofy or but no, I think I think it helps not to think about it too much, and just like you said, just kind of keep it realistic and keep it. I think that's Elmore Leonard's a big influence on that too, where his even if the situations aren't that funny, just having the two characters, the way they're talking to each other is really funny, or just I think a lot of it too is in this book. There's most of the people aren't very good at their job. I think in crime fiction, especially, like, there's a lot of tendency to, like, this man is like the master safecracker, or she's like this, the greatest the greatest bounty hunter in the world. And I think sometimes a lot more humor comes in when it's not, when it's just this guy's kind of just getting by. It's part of his job, and it's just those other books have their, like somebody said with We Child or something, with Reacher is a master, and you're kind of there's never a moment where he kind of fucks everything up and has to, he kind of always seems to know exactly what he's doing. And I think a lot of humor in the stuff I like tends to come in with a little more incompetence, or a little more, people just kind of bumbling through and trying to figure out what to do. And a lot of it, like you said, it is conversation, the way people talk to each other. And that's probably because I have more of that background too, a lot of working in bars and restaurants and things like that, where that just kind of back and forth and banter is just part of how people are.
Well, again, this is another question I was going to ask you a little later, but you brought it up, so let me ask you now, because you have a degree from the Jack Dempsey School, and
Yeah.
you, of course, worked as a bartender. Every bartender I've known always has great stories to tell, um, probably for the obvious reasons. How has that part of your working life impacted your writing?
A ton. I mean, I put that in there kind of as a joke. That is true. I did go to that school, but it's sort of like when you see author bios, and it's like, he holds an MFA from Columbia, and is a graduate. So I thought it would be funny to have, my main education that I tout with my bartending degree, but no, like, so much of it, because I was always really shy. I mean, I still sort of am not the most social person in the world, but I feel like bartending was able to bring me out of my shell enough to talk to people. But it's also a good place, if you're not a big talker, to hear, to listen. And for years, even when I wasn't the most productive writer in the world in terms of being producing great, like finish, I always was like just a constant note taker, and like I have a good memory, so I've always been able to, I have notebooks and notebooks full of, I think a lot of bartenders do. I've met a lot of bartenders over the year who have a book in them, have a book they've been working on but I think just a lot of that stuff, whether it be just be the characters that I've met or the things you overhear or just, the environment of those kind of bars has been a huge influence on, on what I write.
Were you mostly working in somewhat blue collar bars, or did you ever work any of the high end places?
Yeah, I've done both. I did a lot of neighborhood blue collar type bars, I worked at a real dive in Portland, Oregon, that I got a lot of material from. I have a whole book that I want to set in that place. But then I also, when I lived in LA, I catered for Wolfgang Puck. And so I used to work all these fancy, we'd be bartending at whatever movie premieres and fancy Oscar parties and things like that. So that was definitely the higher end of things. But the more interesting stuff was always the more I worked at a place which again is a book in itself. In a way, I worked at a private men's club once where it was pretty much a bunch of old men who it was like almost like working in somebody's clubhouse, and those guys to a man, every single one of those people was interesting, and they were all, not always the people you'd always agree with on things, or you wouldn't necessarily maybe want to talk politics with a lot of them or about other things, but to hear them interact and to see them and just their day-to-day routines, it was just endlessly fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. I bet. Music is a big part of the storytelling in Zig Zag too. Tell me a little bit about your philosophy there and how that influences your writing.
Well, that was part of the character a lot in the book. Like when you mentioned the cover earlier, it's sort of, I'm glad that you liked it because it's sort of, we hoped it would be universal enough for people who don't know what it's referencing, but it would still, because the cover of the book references a nudie suit by Graham Parsons has this famous kind of rhinestone suit that he used to wear, and that we sort of took that off of the design based on that. And so I think country music runs through it a lot because the character Harry used to be a country singer, and he kind of models himself that, like I said, he's sort of a self-styled rhinestone cowboy kind of guy, at least in his mind. And I think that just ran through it. It's sort of, I think if it was a movie, this book, I feel like that's what the soundtrack would be. And I think try not to overdo it, but I think it definitely is sort of infused in it. And it's funny because some people really like it. And I had a couple people say, "Oh, I've actually Googled some of these singers that I've never heard of." But then some people, a friend of mine, I mean, you never know who's gonna. A friend of my mother's was like, "I don't know who any, I get, she just was kind of, all these obscure country singers that she had no idea." But yeah, no, I think it was definitely a huge part of the book, mainly because it's a huge part of the character, and also because it's all my favorite music too. So it's fun for me to kind of play with that stuff and put it in there.
Well, me too. I love a lot of that old school country stuff. I probably, like a lot of us, have really eclectic, wide range of music from Hank Williams to Led Zeppelin pretty easily. And of course, the nudie suit is something. Again, if you know all that old school stuff, you know about Graham Parsons and Nudie Cone and the Nashville nudie suits and all that stuff, and what
Yeah.
an era that is. It just conjures up an era of memories of me sitting at the heel of my grandparents in 1972 while they're watching Hee Haw and having, Ray Price or somebody like that come on and still wearing something like that. So I love that. Again, maybe, man, I'm really, really dating myself here. That's all I can.
Well, it's funny too because my somebody I know, no, it was actually somebody that knows my father had randomly read the book and thought that he was like, you don't seem old enough to have like a 60-year-old son, because he just assumed that, not like I'm 46, but he thought that the book was written because of the references are so dated, and he's like, he thought that the book was written by like an older person, because even not only just the music, but a lot of there's references to movies and to actors and to things like that, and none of them are post probably 1975. I would get, there's not a current reference. You'd be hard pressed to find a current reference in that book, I think.
Right. Well, but thinking of characters in the book, Harry and Fuzzy, some of the others, I absolutely love them. Will we see them again? Is there, is this going to be a one-off, or would
I'm
you?
hoping. Yeah, I actually just sent a chunk of pages. I've been writing. I was writing something totally different, and then I dove when I dove back into the edits to really dive back into the book again. I got more. It kind of got me going again on these characters. So I have another book that I'm a good chunk of the way. I'm hoping by the end of the year that I'm mostly finished with a draft. But I sent about 50 pages or so to my editor last week, and I'm hoping that he hasn't fed back yet, but I think if he responds favorably, that'll give me the kind of the encouragement to keep moving, or to at least see that I'm going in the right direction. But they definitely do. My favorite things, you usually hear it in the context of movies, like a hangout movie, or I think Tarantino always says that about Rio Bravo. It's like the ultimate hangout movie where you just want to, and that's sort of how I feel about this book and these characters, where ideally the reader will enjoy hanging out with them, but even me writing them, I really enjoy kind of hanging out with spending time, the hours and hours you spend every day writing a book. It helps when you kind of really love the characters that you're dealing with.
I agree with that so much, both as a reader and as a writer. Um, we talk about this a lot. All writers, whether it's on this show, certainly, but everywhere. If writers gather, you're talking about character and plot, which comes first, and I think I've heard more and more and more over the years, writers, saying how much effort they put into character over plot. And I always think back to something Stephen King said, which is, why, if you've got really good characters or a really good story, why do you want to muck it up with plot, right? And I get all that, because I will stick with a book. We were talking about this earlier, but I'll stick with a book where I love the characters much longer than I'll stick with a story where I don't like the characters, but the plot's pretty good, but I just don't like. I'm too damn old these days, man. I'm getting old and grumpy when it comes to this. I want characters I like. I want something, you need to have a bad guy, but I don't want every character to be unlikable. And that's the thing I love about reading books like this, Fuzzy and Harry, and sure, there's characters with a lot of flaws, but they're flawed is one thing, unlikable is different. And so, yes, I don't mind spending time with flawed characters. They're fun. They're actually the fun ones. But
Mm-hmm.
you need to feel like some simpatico with them, right? You want them to be, like you say, somebody you'd like to spend time with. So,
Yeah, I think that's a good way to get around like that whole likable character thing too, is where like you said, they can still be flawed, they can be, they can even be shitty people in a lot of ways. But if you want to, if they're fun to, if you like listen to them talk, or if you enjoy what they're doing, and I think that for me, that's was one of the big discoveries of crime fiction, is because I feel like you get enough. Not that the plot is like um not important at all, but like I think with crime fiction, as long as you have that engine there, that kind of, or that thing it can hang on, where there's that there's a it's moving towards something, there's a bit of a, I think you can get away with character stuff a lot more and still make it enjoyable for the reader. Whereas I feel like before I started writing crime fiction, when you write more like literary, or it can just go nowhere, and it's just pages and pages of character stuff, and it doesn't. And I think that was a great thing as a reader and as a writer to get when I started getting more and more into crime, was that engine definitely, can support that, but also give you a lot more leeway to have digressions, and to have those scenes that we talked about, where you're hanging out and you just kind of are with the characters.
right. Well, you noted you're working on some things. What else is next for you? I mean, have you got uh, anything rock solid we can look to and say this is going to be Joe's next project?
Well, roll the I'm working on the sequel. Is called Roll Another Number, and that's kind of what I'm working on at the moment. That's kind of my full-time thing. I just wrote a short story that how, well, you were at BoucherCon. They do like an anthology every year. So I spent a week or so working on a short story to submit for that anthology that I finished last week. And I hadn't written a short story in years, so it was kind of interesting. It was kind of good to take a break from banging your head against the wall with an endless, with a novel to just be like, all right, here's something I'm going to bang out. And it's, in a week and just finish it, start it, finish it. And I think it actually diving back into the book afterwards, it was really helpful. So I finished that. Hopefully that gets picked up by them. If not, I'll ship it around to some other places. But right now it's mostly the novel. Like I said, it's hard enough to get, I mostly write in the morning. I get up, but I work full time. I have a lot of life commitments and stuff. So it's, if I can just get this, that's one of the downsides of crime fiction, unfortunately, is especially you see at VoucherCon, these people who are book a year people, and especially if you're writing a sequel, it should be timely. You don't want it to come out 10 years after the original. So I'm trying to just kind of crank up the pace as much as I can, because I'm naturally kind of a slower, I move at a slower pace naturally. So it's an effort to really, torque it up a bit.
Oh my God, let me tell you, I have to write so many words for a living, and yeah, it's sometimes really hard to keep my motivational Jones going, late in the day. So that's one of my hard things, man. I gotta sometimes it's figuring out my schedule of how I'm going to do things, because I'm generally pretty energetic in the mornings, but as the evenings roll around, man, I used to be such a night owl, and now these days it's just getting old sucks, man. It makes me want to just go lay down.
Yeah, I hear you. I used to be, when things are going well and I'm constantly sticking away to work out, it's great. But in terms of like the slogging of the day to day, because I'm not a morning person, but I have to force myself, because otherwise it won't get done. Because at the end of the night, or at the end of a work day and it's night, you just kind of want to, I might be up for reading over what I've worked on or doing a little tinkering, but yeah, I'm pretty much wiped out but I think that's part of being older too, is you don't have as many. When I was living a more interesting or eventful life, I didn't have, I think one of the good things about having more of a boring day-to-day life is that I'm much more productive writing wise than I used to be when I was out, whether bartending for work or just out a few nights a week, or doing stuff every weekend. We would be packed with stuff, and now it's a little more, it's a little slower, which is good for the writing.
Sedate is somewhat good for your other writing pursuits. That is for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Well, as you know, I like to end the show on a fun question here, and there's really a theme. There's generally a theme here, but I'll let you to see if you suss out the theme. But it's always the same question, in that I have the power to put you together with one of the following three people. Who would you choose and why? The options I'm going to give you are Leonard Cohen, Fuzzy Thurston, or Harry Nilsson. Which of those three would you pick and why?
I would pick Leonard Cohen because he's my all-time favorite of anything. He's in terms of being I get to see him in concert once, which was the greatest. But yeah, Leonard Cohen is my. It wouldn't. I was just going to say Leonard Cohen before you even mentioned the other two people. But I was just curious.
Well, and I want it known that I did not know that.
Oh yeah, because he's not in the book.
No. But
Yeah.
but that was the Elmore Leonard connection, and then the other two, obviously a Fuzzy and a Harry. That was kind of the obvious.
Fuzzy and Harry, yeah. I didn't know the other. I didn't know who Fuzzy wasn't. But I mean, love Harry Nilsson too. But yeah, Leonard Cohen, not only just my favorite singer songwriter, but just seems like he would have been a really fun guy to hang out with. What's always surprising about him, is that he's got this kind of morose, bleak image, but then you see these interviews with him and you read his biographies, and he was actually like a really fun, kind of a funny guy.
Yeah, seemed like a really smart guy. Really, yeah, good
Yeah,
choice.
and I'd start smoking cigarettes again too, just to hang out with Leonard. That would be great.
Well, Joe, thank you very much for taking time today. I really appreciate it. It's been
thanks for having me. It was great.
Absolutely. It was a lot of fun talking about the book. I love having debut authors on, because, this is a hard industry, and trying to get anything in print anywhere is tough. And, and I mean, and I'm going to hold it up again, because if you haven't seen it, I really recommend this. This is a fun read. I'm about halfway through right now. As you noted, I have to read a lot of books, so I don't get to read on the schedule I wish I could.
Mm-hmm.
No one will pay me just to sit around and read. I'm very disappointed at that. But in the meantime, great book. I'm really enjoying it so far. I can't wait to read the sequel whenever that appears in the world. I'm going to remind everybody really quickly. If you haven't done so already, please hit the subscribe button, whether it's on YouTube or on whatever podcast platform you're using. It really does help other people find the show. And as I always say, I think it's great for more people to see the show or listen to the show, because this is where you get some insights into perhaps your own work and maybe just discover a new writer. And that's never a bad thing. So please hit subscribe, leave a review. Even though we were talking earlier about not liking reviews, it would really help me if you threw a review on there. That would be great. Build up the subscriber base a little bit. For my guest today, Joe O'Brien, really thanks. I really appreciate you coming on. This was a lot of fun.
Definitely. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, I'll leave everyone with the same thing I leave you with every time. I don't mean for it to be redundant, but I mean it with all my heart because I believe this to be true. Tomorrow is not promised to any of us, so please make today count. Until next time, for my guest, J.D. O'Brien, and myself, Rich Eisen, this has been the Open Mic, Writers in Their Own Words. Take care.